We are still black in this country. We don't trust this country in terms of meritocracy always. We know the bottom line is that just like women are underpaid compared to male counterparts, blacks are underpaid compared to white counterparts. And so when you look at it from that perspective, and of course, people look at me, I'm not talking about me, even though I got news for you. I am underpaid compared to some people on television and what they get paid, but that's a subject for another day. I ain't apologizing for that to a damn soul. I am underpaid. Having said all of that, it ain't about me.
And get rewarded. Don't hate the player, hate the game. That is exactly what Stephen A. Smith did to ESPN with his contract negotiations. This is Sports Guy talking that you guys are watching and listening to. I am Dustin Tran, your host, as I am here today to talk about Stephen A. Smith agreeing to a record-breaking contract at ESPN. Stephen A. Smith is now getting paid $100 million over the next 5 years in his next contract. To Stephen A. Smith's satisfaction, he is now the highest paid sports talker at ESPN. Before I say anything else, though, I want to present you guys with a topic question. So here it is. What is your reaction to Stephen A. Smith's record-breaking contract at ESPN? I can't say that I'm surprised this happened, but I am disappointed that ESPN caved into Stephen A. Smith's demands. ESPN got taken to the cleaners in the Stephen A. Smith negotiations. I said that Stephen A. Smith would be coming back to ESPN if they offered him $100 million over the next 5 years. ESPN did exactly that. Do I believe this is an overpay? Absolutely. However, Stephen A. Smith is the biggest star of ESPN. If ESPN were to get rid of Stephen A. Smith, ESPN would have ceased to exist by the year of 2030. Who would ESPN have replaced Stephen A. Smith with? No one, because Stephen A. Smith is ESPN. He's the biggest draw on their network. Stephen A. Smith demanded an insane number, and ESPN catered to those numbers. Not only that, but Stephen A. Smith was also able to get himself off NBA Countdown. Stephen A. Smith in his previous contract was getting paid $12 million a year so he could go on First Take, show up on Get Up as a guest, and show up on all kinds of different shows while having NBA coverage on a consistent basis. Stephen A. Smith was all over the screen. Now Stephen A. Smith is getting paid generational money to do less work than ever. Stephen A. Smith, according to what I saw from Front Office Sports, will be doing less work compared to what he did in his previous contract. He will be there on First Take, but outside of First Take appearances, he's not going to really be involved a lot on ESPN. Stephen A. Smith has been taken off of NBA Countdown, which is good for Stephen A. Smith's workload. Instead, Stephen A. Smith will now focus on being a podcaster and working on his independent brand. That is good for the case of Stephen A. Smith, because I said Stephen A. Smith would not be willing to come back for ESPN at a certain price unless if they were willing to give him $100 million over a 5-year stretch. Stephen A. Smith gets the best of both worlds. He gets more freedom, he gets more control, he gets to focus on his independent podcast, and he gets paid record-breaking money at ESPN. ESPN has shown that they have to buy entertainers in order to get them to stay on their network. That's why they had to pay a guy like Pat McAfee $17 million. Pat McAfee was a very good YouTuber, and he had a large audience in the streaming world. Obviously, ESPN was yearning for numbers and to get stars at ESPN, so they didn't really have any leverage in the Pat McAfee deal. Obviously, Stephen A. Smith copied the game plan that Pat McAfee used. He also used the victim card just in case ESPN was going to play hardball. He used the race card, complaining that black people do not get paid enough compared to white people. Therefore, you need to pay me even more money. ESPN catered into those demands just like woke networks do. We all know ESPN is a woke sports network. They're the worldwide leader in woke for a reason. I also want to show you guys this clip of Stephen A. Smith wanting more power at ESPN. He wanted to have more say in politics and to have more control over what he wanted to talk about in general. I found this interview particularly interesting. Roll the film.
I have a very, very close relationship with Jimmy Pitaro, who's been incredible to me, and Bob Iger as well, of course. And knowing when you have those kind of relationships, you don't buy those, you know, and to have the kind of relationship that I have with them, you know, everything that I want to do, you got to make sure all of that is there and it's in the language, the devil's in the details, because from a numbers perspective, we've agreed months ago, you know, we like literally months ago. It's not about the money at this point because the money was agreed to back in October. The issue is all the things that I just finished talking to you about and what I want to do, working out that language because lawyers get involved and all of that other stuff. But I work at a great place. We're a worldwide leader. We're number one. And I've got great bosses. I've got great colleagues and friends. I love working there. And I'm anticipating that, you know, hopefully we'll reach a deal very, very soon. And I'll march forward with ESPN for the foreseeable future.
Well, none of that was particularly surprising. We all know that Stephen A. Smith wanted more power at ESPN, and with the lack of leverage ESPN had, they really had no choice but to offer Stephen A. Smith a record-breaking contract. If you get rid of Stephen A. Smith, who are you going to replace Stephen A. Smith with? Shannon Sharpe does not work on First Take full-time, and let's be completely honest, Shannon Sharpe does not need ESPN to remain relevant. However, ESPN needed a guy like Stephen A. Smith on their network in order to remain relevant in the mainstream world. A lot of people do not listen to mainstream networks anymore. A lot of people listen to independent podcasts. That's the way to listen to sports news, and that's how people have been listening to news on politics as well. That's why nobody trusts networks like CNN, ABC, CBS, you name it. Instead, you're listening to independent podcasters that have their own thoughts instead of repeating talking points made by executives. Stephen A. Smith proved his worth at ESPN by being able to draw in ratings. Do I think he's overpaid at ESPN? Of course, I don't really think he provides a whole lot of analysis, but they're not paying him to be an analyst. They're paying him a lot of money to be an entertainer. I don't particularly find Stephen A. Smith funny for the most part, but he certainly has his moments. In a way, Stephen A. Smith is very similar to Dak Prescott in the sense that they both have their moments, but they're both overpaid. Stephen A. Smith only draws 400,000 viewers on average. However, ESPN is struggling to maintain their audience. That's why they had to go ahead and make a move for Stephen A. Smith. Is it a massive overpay? Yes. Was it a necessary move for ESPN to make though? Absolutely. If Stephen A. Smith was replaced on ESPN, they would have to go with a lineup of people like Monica McNutt, David Dennis Jr., Brian Windhorst, and other woke members at ESPN. Although Stephen A. Smith is woke to an extent, it's not exactly like Stephen A. Smith completely believes in the woke agenda. Stephen A. Smith is a mediocre sports talker that is getting paid like he's a generational sports talker. ESPN had to make this move though. If they didn't make this move, they would have ceased to exist by 2030. This is basically going to be Stephen A. Smith's last big payday. Good job to Stephen A. Smith though for scamming the heck out of ESPN. I support guys that get their money, that's for sure. So that is why I am not surprised that Stephen A. Smith got paid $20 million a year at ESPN, even though he is a mediocre sports talker at best. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to Sports Guy Talking. Like the video and please comment down below. If you guys do that, I may shout you guys out in my Instagram story every Monday. That will be for the @DustinNasTran Instagram account. Make sure to follow me on Instagram @DustinNasTran, and that's Sports Guy Talking. Also, go follow me on Twitter @DustinNasTran. Again, go ahead and do those things that I just told you guys to go do. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the content that was just produced. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed that video. Want more Sports Guy Talking, the home of great sports content? Make sure you click that subscribe button to get the latest from Sports Guy Talking. Go ahead and like the video, comment down below, Check the description box on the video in order to follow my Instagram and Twitter. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from the YouTube channel, Sports Guy Talking.